Thank you for joining our webinar today. CAFII is a not-for-profit industry association dedicated to the development of an open and flexible insurance marketplace. Our 15 members include the insurance arms of Canada's major banks and credit unions, along with their insurer partners, which underwrite credit protection insurance and travel insurance. This is another in our webinar series which focus on key regulators, policymakers, and other experts and thought leaders in the insurance sector, sharing their insights and perspectives, and on related industry and societal issues. As I mentioned earlier, the topic that we will be discussing today is travel and travel insurance trends. Now, we're very fortunate today to be joined by three expert panelists. Katia Umotoni-Wazi, Head of Sales Operations and Digital Enablement at Manulife, is Chair of CAFII's Travel Insurance Experts Committee and is a seasoned professional with a passion for travel insurance. She has 23 years experience in the travel insurance industry and has held various positions in customer service, claims, product management, sales, information systems, and project management. Helen Cosburn brings 16 years of experience within the travel insurance sector to her current role as Director of Strategic Partnerships at Alliance Global Assistance. Helen has been with that company for the past 10 years across various sales and distribution leadership roles. She currently leads multiple distributions channels for Alliance, including the financial institutions market of banks and credit unions. Helen has a keen focus on building value and enabling strategic growth for her partners. As an active member of the travel insurance industry, Helen currently serves as chair of the Membership and Communications Committee at the Travel Health Insurance Association of Canada, or THIA. And our third panelist is Sheila Burns, the Director, Health and Disability Policy at the Canadian Life and Health Insurance Association, CLHIA, where she works with member and associate companies to build consensus on industry policy positions. Sheila has worked in the insurance industry for over 20 years in both the direct and reinsurance markets. Now, members of the audience, if you have any questions that you would like to pose during the webinar, please send them to me as the host using the Q&A function of Zoom, and I will pose them on your behalf. Unless you specifically request in your question to be identified as its source, I will pose all questions on an anonymous basis. And just before we get the webinar underway, I want to extend a special welcome to a number of VIP guest attendees. In addition to many representatives from our 15 CAFII member companies and our 9 associates, which are key suppliers to the bancassurance sector, we have VIP attendees today from allied industry associations such as the Canadian Life and Health Insurance Association, or CLHIA, the Travel and Health Insurance Association, or THIA, and as well from a number of insurance and financial services regulator and policymaker authorities, including the following: the British Columbia Financial Services Authority, or BCFSA, the Insurance Council of British Columbia, Alberta Treasury Board and Finance, or ATBF, the Alberta Insurance Council, or AIC, the Insurance Councils of Saskatchewan, or ICS, the Insurance Council of Manitoba, or ICM, the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario, or FSRA, the Autorité des marchés financiers, or AMF, and the Financial and Consumer Services Commission of New Brunswick, or FCNB. Welcome to you all. And now let's begin. And Helen, I'm going to turn to you first. Has travel fully returned at this stage to pre-pandemic levels, Helen?
Yeah, thanks, Keith. I mean, I think this is a really ongoing topic or a big question. And certainly if we'd had this discussion a month ago, it might look a little different. My short answer is I think we're on the cusp of it, but we're facing some new challenges. So let's look into a few data points to see kind of where we're at. The first one we can look at is airport traffic. And certainly this shows a really strong story. Throughout the second half of 2023, volumes through Canadian airports hovered just below and just under 2019 levels. October volume showed 114% of 2019. So really good news story in terms of airport traffic. Travel out of the country, so outbound overnight travel, stats through the conference board show a little bit of a less optimistic picture, showing that for the first 8 months of 2023, we're about 90% of 2019 levels. A third metric we could look at is travel type. So we talk a lot about leisure travel, but business travel still is lagging a little bit behind in comparison to 2019 levels. So much of the travel that we're seeing both in airport and in overnight travel is really weighed heavily in favor of leisure travel. The last point I just want to make here is that we haven't seen, across many of the provinces rather, we haven't seen that major first snowfall. That's a huge driver for Canadians booking their sunny winter weather escapes. And so we'll be watching closely to see how that first snowfall impacts Canadians' decisions to travel, and that balance between trying to seek the sun versus the economic pressures they're feeling at home. So I think the coming month or two, if you will, is going to be an interesting indication to see if we can, in fact, overtake that cusp.
So the picture's not entirely clear, it sounds like, Helen.
Yeah, again, think we're just about there, but not quite. And if we looked at things just in isolation to, pre-pandemic and the impact of the pandemic, I'd say we're just about there. But the reality is nothing happens in a vacuum, and there are other factors that are starting to come into play.
All right, thank you for that. Sheila, you want to jump in?
Yeah, just to add another factor that is maybe clouding the stats is that a lot of people that traveled, especially in the spring and summer, I think we're still using some vouchers and credits from pandemic cancellations. So I guess we'll see what that does for next year, and it might be based sort of on how their experiences went. If they had great experiences, they might be more comfortable booking further travel. And some more stats just to add to Helen's are, it might be an indicator if we look at the claims that were paid for travel insurance that kind of relates to how much people are traveling. So for the 4 years before the pandemic, the claims paid, and this is based on data that we get from our member companies, and we publish this in the CLHIA fact book. The 4 years pre-pandemic were pretty consistent, around $0.9 billion paid in travel claims. And then there was a spike for the year 2019, of course, a little spike, not gargantuan, but it went up to about $1 billion in claims paid. And then that really dropped in 2021 to 0.4. And for 2022, the claims paid for travel insurance were 0.7 billion. So not quite back to pre-pandemic, but getting there.
Very interesting. Thank you for that, Sheila. Katia, what's your perspective?
Yeah, another interesting trend that we've noticed is that with those stats that Helen has tabled, when you look at the cost of travel, usually you would think that as prices have increased, you would see similar decline in people interested in traveling. But we're seeing quite the opposite. We're trending towards reaching 2019 levels or even more, even with the price of travel increasing. The other thing that's interesting as well is we've noticed that usually before, as you got closer to departure, those last minute trips would cost you less. It seems to be traveling the other way. As you get closer, prices are increasing just because the inventory is not as much as we had before. So all that is leading me to be very optimistic that despite the high costs, despite the fact that people who were usually relying on last minute bookings for cheaper flights or cheaper travel, it still hasn't had an impact. And we're seeing that we're getting closer, and in some cases, like in October, exceeding 2019. So maybe 2024, 2025 is going to look great. I'm optimistic on that.
Katia, I might just do a follow-up. Is part of this that people who were at home for several years and weren't able to travel are trying to catch up?
It could be. It could be. We'll just have to wait and see once that revenge travel has settled, what are the next years going to look like? Are people now realizing that travel now, life is short? It's hard to tell. We'll just have to wait and see what the next 2-3 years look like, and then see what the future trends will be. But those are all interesting factors that they're painting an optimistic picture, in my opinion.
Well, optimism is always good. I'm going to open up our first poll, which is on this very issue. And I'm going to ask audience members to please answer the question, do you feel that people are traveling more, less, or the same amount as pre-pandemic? We'll just wait a few minutes to see what the answers are, and then I'll ask you to comment. All right, we're still getting some responses. We'll just wait a few more moments. All right, very interesting. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results. And I hope you can see those. So it's split right down the middle. So 30% feel that there's more travel, 27% feel that there's less, and 43% feel it's the same. Helen, I think in a way this sort of is consistent with your comments that there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of factors, and it's kind of hard to know exactly what is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as I said, I think right now too, we're at that cusp and we have to see how the coming months play out. I mean, we all know that we're leading into what we typically call winter travel season, and it'll be interesting to see how travelers decide to book their vacations this year.
Katia, Sheila, are you surprised by these results?
Not at
Well,
all. Not at all.
No, and I think, it does speak to what we were saying, that it's sure. And then something Helen said is it depends on the kind of travel. So business less, maybe pleasure more. And one number I saw that I was really surprised about is that cruise travel is predicted to be higher than pre-pandemic levels for 2023.
Absolutely.
And I really thought that might be one where travelers were a little bit leery post-pandemic, but if it's succeeding, then that's a bit of a surprise. So yeah, I really think it depends on the kind of travel.
Well, Katia, let me turn to you to start us off on a related but different question, which is what has changed since pandemic days around travel and travel insurance?
Thank you, Keith. Yeah, since the pandemic, we've noticed a change in the way people travel. We're seeing a lot of longer duration trips, a good amount of multi-generational trips as well. A lot of high-end bucket list items. I mean, we're seeing trips around $300,000, $400,000. It's almost as if people are saying, like, let me spend now. You never know. We have heard some stories of people who are starting to spend the money they would have left for the kid, saying, let me use it now, whatever they believing to say, let me use that for travel.
Better not tell the kids.
A lot of group travel. Is it possibly that from isolation days they're saying, let's go out together? People are now going back as well. One trend we're noticing is pre-pandemic, a lot of people were starting to gravitate towards online bookings. Since the pandemic, we're seeing a lot of trending back to booking with a travel agent or a travel agencies, because people have now realized that it's great and it's important to have a seasoned professional by your side when something like a pandemic happens. So we'll have to wait again and see where that leads. But those are some of the differences that we're noticing pre versus post-pandemic. When it comes to insurance, interesting enough, we didn't really used to see a lot of corporate travelers interested in insurance. Now we are starting to see a good amount of demand from that group. Visitors to Canada, people who had put off visiting family abroad are coming to Canada, visiting family, and they're obviously buying insurance. A lot of travelers as well. Before, we used to have, you would see cases where someone would be offered insurance and they would be like, yeah, you know what, just protect my flight. That's all. I'm just wanting to protect my travel investment. People are now very keen on not only getting insurance coverage, but good coverage, comprehensive coverage. There's been a huge uptake in insurance purchases for like comprehensive packages that would include medical, baggage, delays, because when the pandemic was happening, or even after the pandemic, you couldn't really predict the type of claim you would have. So people are gravitating towards those types of insurance packages where they know that regardless of what happens, they will have the protection they need. And a recent survey by something interesting, there's a recent survey by a Snowbird Advisor that has indicated that snowbirds, especially the new snowbirds, are starting to look at destinations other than the US. We're starting to see destinations like in Europe, Caribbean for snowbirds. And snowbirds are saying that they're not really looking to always go back to the same destination year after year, which is what they tended to do. If you went to Florida, you were a Florida snowbird. But now they're indicating that they want to explore. 1 year they might go to Europe, 1 year to Mexico, 1 year to the US. So again, we'll have to wait and see how the 2, 3, 4 years pan out, but there seems to be a shift.
That's very
in how
interesting.
people
I saw you
behave.
nodding your head there, Helen. It sounds like you're in agreement.
Absolutely. A lot of that definitely resonates with me. Probably the laundry list of it, to be found, to be clear. I agree. We're definitely seeing a large uptake in interest in purchasing of comprehensive coverage. I think the reality is that more than ever, I think Canadians know that travel insurance is important. A recent study that we did, a consumer kind of confidence study done by Allianz, indicated that 3 in 4 Canadians felt that travel insurance was more or equally important compared to pre-pandemic. And that's 32% of Canadians indicating that it is more important. So that prominence and need for insurance is relevant and is resonating with consumers. And so we're seeing that in purchase of fully comprehensive plans, as Katia mentioned. I love also the point on snowbirds. I know we often talk in the industry about pricing and rates for the snowbird market, and that's certainly an avid traveler population. In that segment, travel insurance is extremely important to. And as they look to other destinations, perhaps that can be a factor that's impacting affordability of not just the travel itself, but also the insurance. When you're looking at different modeling that takes rate of the destination into the pricing factors. So I think there's some interesting trends that have come out of the last couple of years.
Sheila, I know you cover some of these issues as well at CLHIA. Is this consistent with your observations?
Yeah, absolutely. The only thing I would add is that, we've also seen some responses from government around travel and protection for consumers. So the airline passenger protection regulations have definitely been a big topic since the pandemic. And, we're still waiting for final regulations and seeing how the airlines respond to that. But it's, there's been responses from government around travel issues.
Well, Sheila, let me dig in a little more deeply with you on this very issue around risks. I know an important part of your role at CLHIA and what CLHIA tries to do more generally around insurance is educate consumers and let them understand the risks if they don't protect themselves. Do you feel Canadians are more aware of the risk of traveling without health insurance? And I might add a supplemental, which is especially around younger people, where you still hear stories of younger people feeling they're invulnerable and just heading off to locations without any coverage. And you do read some very upsetting stories sometimes about the results of that if they're not protected and come into harm. So Sheila, your thoughts on that would be really interesting.
Yeah, I think some of the questions that we get in the industry definitely indicate that people are more aware. They're, thinking about it more than normal, and maybe surprisingly, particularly young people. So just stealing some information from the study that Helen's group did, it did indicate that millennials are definitely buying travel insurance. It's on their checklist before they travel. So that's good news. They're very aware of it. Some of the questions that we get show that people think about the details more. So it might have just been something, you're getting ready for your trip, it's on the checklist, buy some travel insurance, and you kind of would go online or talk to an advisor and maybe select the cheapest thing just because you had to have it. You felt like you had to have it, but you weren't really sure what you were covered for, and you'd maybe get a nice little brochure with it or a PDF, and you didn't read the details. But people are reading them now. So they're asking more questions. So, we hear people talking about, I wouldn't be covered because I have a pre-existing condition. So that really gives us in the industry an opportunity to, dispel some myths, right? So it's not necessarily a pre-existing condition, but read your policy, and it might be wording around stability and how stable your condition is, and that you might actually be covered still for other conditions or other things that happen when you travel, just not that particular condition. So it's really given us an opportunity to educate. And another big education piece that you know, it might impact how much insurance people buy, really, is they're becoming more aware of where they already have insurance. So I think that there's been a lot of discussion about coordinating and different you know, getting coverage from different areas. And, you know, there's been a lot of stories in the news. And I think that makes consumers sort of perk up and say, oh, like I'm covered through that. You know, I have coverage through a credit card. Or, you know, we had our travel committee work with the SAAQ in Quebec to talk about coordinating some services and claims with them. And a lot of people, even that work for insurance companies in the travel claims area, weren't aware that if they are a resident of Quebec, that they have that coverage outside of the province. So, you know, things like that, learning that your provincial coverage covers you in different provinces in Canada. A lot of people didn't even realize they had out-of-country emergency medical coverage with their group benefits. So there's, you know, been a lot of education there. And another question that we've started to get a lot from different areas is how much coverage is enough. So again, not just, you know, what would be the cheapest for me to buy, but oh, this cheapest option is giving me X dollars of coverage and I'm going to this place. Would that be enough? So they're really looking into the details more, I think.
No, that's encouraging. An educated consumer is obviously what everyone wants. And I know Helen Thea has put a lot of emphasis on these sorts of issues as well. Understand your policies, do the research, know it's covered, know it's not. So perhaps you could jump in on this and let us know if it's your perspective as well that consumers are becoming more educated and understanding what they're buying better.
Sure, thanks, Keith. And yeah, well said. Yeah, we're constantly trying to remind the consumer public that, you know, knowing their benefits, knowing their coverage, understanding their policy is critical. And I think that in response post-pandemic, we're certainly seeing that. I know within our organization, we're certainly seeing the continued volume of customers calling in to confirm what type of benefits do they have, either in their group benefits, credit card benefits, wherever they might have. Really, their starting point of thinking about insurance is trying to seek to understand what do they have today. And that's a really great starting point. And then as well, I know through the work with some of the regulatory work on the C86 bill that was implemented, we also ask questions about appropriateness. Is this the appropriate policy, or do they already have coverage? So that trying to understand existing benefits is already integrated now into sales processes. And I think that's a really great thing for the consumer base. And ultimately circles back to, you know, they have a desire to understand their current insurance, which is excellent, and then to seek out to fill those gaps, seek advice to fill those gaps in those coverages.
Patty, your
And
thoughts?
I'll add to that. I agree with my colleague. It's I remember when the pandemic was over and the advisories were lifted, there was technically no longer a need to buy specific COVID coverage or a specific COVID policy. But it took a really great amount of education and us reiterating it to agents. You don't have to sell that policy anymore. But clients would come out asking, I want the COVID policy. So to get to a point where you are advising your clients or your agents, you can go back to selling the regular policy, but they're still so intent on making sure they have the proper coverage, they almost would voluntarily double down on the coverage. You have COVID specific coverage. So I really echo that. It's really broad awareness, and travelers are now intentional about their travel insurance needs, which is great, which is what we've always wanted.
Katia, most travel insurance policies would cover COVID as part of the policy.
Right, since the advisory is being lifted, right, exactly. Yeah, it's a medical condition, so, but it took a while.
It's captured.
It's captured, correct. But it took a while to get to that comfort level to say, it's okay, we're going back to normal. So just to echo that, but again, yeah, they're very conscious about the choices they're making about travel insurance coverage.
All right, well, thank you, all three of you. I'm going to pause a moment before we continue and go to our second poll. I'm just going to launch it. And the question is, do you feel people are spending more, less, or the same amount on travel insurance as pre-pandemic? So we'll just wait a few moments and see what attendees answer. All right, the answers are flowing in. Just give me one more moment and I'll launch the poll. Okay, excellent. So let me share the results, and they're quite overwhelming in favor of more. So there is definitely a consistent view with what each of you has said, that Canadians are more aware of the risks that they face. And I think these results are probably quite indicative of what's happening, because we do have a lot of THEA members that we're delighted to have join us today. So quite a few travel insurance experts, like the three of you, are in attendance, and so they would have a good sense of the pulse of what's happening. I don't think these results would surprise any of the three of you. Is that correct?
Correct.
No, absolutely not. I mean, I can jump in and say, well, first off, I would say the reality is I think you could probably substitute just about any word in for travel insurance and say that you're spending more on it post-pandemic. So that's point one. And two, I would say, we are definitely seeing that increased appetite for the comprehensive Acadia talked about,
Yes.
wanting to have full coverage. In fact, even, consumers seeking out too much coverage, and, advisors really needing to counsel them. So absolutely, consumers want that coverage. And as well, I mean, the cost of travel has gone up. And so if you're talking technical products, trip cancellation, trip interruption, those rates are going up correspondingly. So absolutely not surprised to see that. I will add that in the last, let's say, couple of weeks, starting to see a slight shift in this as average premiums starting to change, starting to come down, in some sense, seeing some shorter trips being booked, more frequent, shorter trips being booked, and spending less. So perhaps, not going on the all-out bucket list trips that they took last year, but spending a little bit differently, again, perhaps in response to, being a little bit more conservative about the financial pressures at home.
All right, thank you for that. Katia, I'm going to hope that there's nobody from Toronto Pearson Airport on the call for my next question to you. So media reports suggest that Pearson Airport is literally one of the worst in the world. Is this vital Canadian transportation hub really that bad?
I would say it has gotten better. Right out of the pandemic. I mean, it was a perfect storm, and in some cases, literally. I mean, you're looking at that hub, you're looking at staff shortages, you were looking at weather incidents. There was some construction happening, and then there was that pent-up demand where, for the 2 years we were on lockdown, a lot of people had been seeking employment elsewhere, and when it was time to pick up travel, really the staffing couldn't line up with how quickly people wanted to resume travel. So it has gotten better, and I think anyone who has traveled through Pearson, I mean, there was a time where you would book a trip and you weren't sure if you were going to travel today, tomorrow, in a week. It has gotten better. Now, when I pass through Pearson, you no longer see a lot of that luggage lying around that we used to see. At some point, it was like, is this a warehouse? What is going on? That has substantially subsided. It's gotten better. It's still not to where we would want it to be. And I was looking at some interesting stats that were ranking airports in the world. And you're right, Keith, Toronto was at the top for delays, followed by Frankfurt. But interesting enough, when I was looking at it, when it came to baggage loss or baggage delay, Chicago O'Hare Airport was ranking first, ahead of Toronto Pearson. So it is getting better, and let's hope that trend is going to keep improving. But whoever was saying that, they were lying. Toronto Pearson was not great.
Thanks, Katia. Helen, any thoughts?
I think Katia summed it up well. My personal experiences have been rather good. I've traveled in and out of the airport this year. Certainly last year had some challenges, but this year, one delay on the tarmac, but otherwise I would say many trips in and out with the smooth sailing. And like Keith, you said that you hope there's no one from Pearson on the call. I'll say I hope there's no one from O'Hare on the call, because that would be my nemesis airport, and one that seems to always lose everything for me. But I think Pearson's improving, and I think that events or the reports of these events are certainly diminishing. So let's hope that we're going to see a smoother winter travel season this year.
All right, thanks. Sheila, last word to you on Pearson.
Yeah, and this is not a CLHIA opinion. This is just my own personal analysis of what I see in the airport world. Is, you know, they Katya and Helen both mentioned O'Hare, and another one I would throw in there is Atlanta. So any of these airports that have multiple terminals and different methods to get between them, they're problematic. And my insight into it is I think that sometimes automation and it has caused some problems. So, if you're a first time traveler or a not very frequent traveler and you come into Pearson, 20 years ago, you probably booked your flight with a travel agent. You're going to come in and you're going to go and speak to someone at the counter who's going to give you your boarding pass and tell you exactly what you need to do. And they're going to take your bag for you there. But now, you walk into Pearson and you're not really sure how to get your boarding pass. Do you have it on your phone? Do you still have to go and print it from a kiosk? And how do you use the kiosk? And then what do? You want to check your bag. Oh, it's a machine. I don't know how to use this machine. And then, there's a lot of frustration at the airport because there's lineups now at this machine because it's not working very well. And, so then if you're connecting flights, you haven't talked to a person yet. So you suddenly realize, well, I don't know what I have to do to make my connection. And I'm a little flustered because my plane was delayed. And so my connection time is short. And wait, do I have to pick up my luggage and recheck it in? So from experienced travelers, I've heard like, oh yeah, it was fine. Everything went fine. There were some lineups. You get there early and it's fine. But I think those are the people that know what to do. So I've been, I was thinking about this question from the perspective of a first-time traveler or an inexperienced traveler, or someone who's traveling under stress. If you're traveling to attend a funeral or something like that, and any little thing, you just don't have someone walking you through the process from start to finish. So I think it makes it hard. And then of course, the more people that are slowing down the process, the people who want to move through it quickly are frustrated. So the more opportunities for confusion at an airport makes it seem worse. And I think that's why some of these multiple terminal big international hubs are causing problems.
Yeah, I've noticed that it just takes a few little things to really throw the whole mechanics into disarray. And so, if it works, it works. But if it doesn't, it's very painful. And I think that's part of it as well, right, Sheila?
Yeah, absolutely. And you come to the baggage place if you're risky enough to check a bag, and if that machine's not working quite well, or people are scared what's going to happen with my bag. So there's just a lot of tension around it.
So I want to dig in a little more deeply on some really interesting points each of you made about how Canadians are shifting somewhat in terms of the kind of travel they're seeking. And I'd like to start with you, Helen, about the travel aspirations of Canadians. And are they looking for more thematic or experience-oriented travel? And what other trends have you observed, Helen, in terms of a shift in terms of what people want?
Sure, yeah. I would say first and foremost, the thing we've noticed coming out of the pandemic is Canadians continue to value travel. And so we first saw that last year with the trend of revenge travel. But now we seem to be, almost on the other side of that trend, and we're seeing old trends start to reemerge. So the top of that is fundamental driver for Canadians really hasn't changed. And I'm sure it's no surprise, and especially with the weather now, that seeing that Canadians, they're seeking sunny weather, sun destinations for their upcoming vacation. That's nearly half of Canadians still using that as their driver for why they want to go on vacation. And second, and a fast follow on that is those seeking, to have those experiences with their loved ones, make new memories, and have that downtime with their family and loved ones. And that's a close second. And again, those probably not surprising. But as you raised, Keith, experience-oriented activities are certainly a big theme right now. And 1 in 3 Canadians report that appetite to have a new experience in an unfamiliar place as a driver for travel. And it certainly aligns with what we're seeing in terms of the boom of experience related spending in 2023. So if you think back during the pandemic, we focused on essential and discretionary goods. And over the past year, we've seen that discretionary services have skyrocketed. And a well-known example of this, and indulge me for a moment, but a well-known example of this is the Taylor Swift concert. When we see people spending thousands of dollars to go to this concert, not just the tickets themselves, but the travel and the hotel and everything to go along with it, wanting to create the ultimate experience. And that certainly extends to, other ways of spending. And again, that experience-based spending. And I think that theme is going to continue as we look to have new experiences.
That's very interesting. Katia, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, for sure. I totally agree with Helen. And I mean, we're also seeing a trend of individuals taking the trip of a lifetime earlier in life. Like at some point, maybe you would wait until you were retired or closer to retirement, but we're seeing a trend of people deciding to make those trips earlier in life, hearing certain things that you wouldn't necessarily have heard of before. They're now selling 2-year cruises, individuals who go around the globe twice on a cruise. So definitely more experience seeking travelers. And yeah, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see how much. I think a lot of that is attributable to the pandemic and the 2-year lockdown, and it'll be interesting to see how and if that will continue to evolve.
Sheila, final thoughts to you?
Yeah, I think that another thing that's influencing people is really influencers, social media. So I can't believe, like, I agree with Katya, like younger people taking these amazing trips. I can't believe the number of people I know that went to Greece this summer. And it's, I'd never thought about going to Greece when I was a university student or in my 20s. That's a huge expense and a huge expedition. So, a lot of people are really making these big trips, but maybe thinking, I do want it to be the full experience and I want to go somewhere and be able to, pack a lot into a day. So I'm going to do that when I'm young, or, if they're having children later in life, that's why they want to get these travel experiences in. But I am also, and this is just anecdotal from people I know, also a lot of people who, this time of year we get sort of our first ice storm or snowstorm or something, and they'll take these short little trips down to Cancun or somewhere just to get away for a long weekend and recharge and get away from the weather. So yeah, on both ends of it, little short trips and really big trips.
Yeah, I know one of my daughters was, sharing with me that a lot of her friends, she was in university during COVID, and they felt like 1 year of their lives was sort of lost in terms of the university experience. Campus was closed, all the courses were online, and so a lot of those young people have traveled to try to capture some of the experiences that they missed. So it definitely resonates to my ears that is something that people of all ages have thought of doing. I want to move now to coverage and a slightly more technical question around travel health insurance, trip cancellation insurance, and baggage loss insurance. How has that changed? How has it improved in response to the pandemic and in response to the heightened expectations of Canadians? And as well, how has it changed in response to this resurgent travel that you've all mentioned? So Sheila, let me start with you on that question.
So I think that there's a few things that have changed, and some of this was changing pre-pandemic too, is just making sure that coverage offerings and policies were easy to understand, and there was some consistency across policies to make it easier for the consumer to understand. I think in response to the pandemic, there's been more options available, and maybe in some situations, more options to select those options. So, for example, when you go to book a flight, it's not just extra at the end about insurance. You're asked about a lot of these things as you go, and there's maybe 3 different flight options that might include some sort of protection. whether it's, trip cancellation or how to change your trip. And these things are offered along the way. So it's really top of mind that these things could happen. And, as we've said before, I think consumers are really responding to that and looking for it. They're looking for what will happen if I cancel my trip, if I need to cancel my trip, or if my trip is canceled on me, which is happening more. And so, Keith, you mentioned students, and that's a great example where I think that students and maybe whoever's helping them with booking flights are encouraging some trip cancellation coverage, because if your flight is canceled and you've got a specific, you don't have a lot of time to play with. You're coming home for a specific event like the holidays, or you're returning to school in time for an exam. You can't really work with delays that much. And so you really want some protection around that. One thing that, I wanted to mention about baggage loss insurance, I don't know if that's, if there's been a change in that, or if people are responding in a different way rather than getting insurance. I think from, again, personal experience, just the number of people that are traveling with carry-on only, particular for business travel, but even, people going on vacations for a week or two, what they're trying to pack into a carry-on just to avoid that horrible situation of losing their luggage. I think that's really increased. So that's, one way that people are responding as well.
Thanks, Sheila. Helen?
Sure. Anecdotally, I'm definitely one of those people who've tried to take business and personal by cramming it all into my carry-on. So I can definitely relate to that. And something else Sheila touched on is around the benefits. I think we talked about earlier how customers are really seeking to understand what benefits they have today. So I think the simplicity of the language is really important, making it easy for customers to understand. That's not necessarily something that's new, but given that consumers are much more in tune to their coverage and wanting to read up before they travel, I think it's vitally important that we make that language as easy as possible for them to understand. Really making sure that all the benefits really are spelled out in layman's terms, so that they know their coverage and know where they might have any gaps or any exposure.
Excellent. And Katia?
Yeah, and to add to that, one more thing too is even not just the coverage, but sometimes the way that the coverage is offered. People seeking comprehensive coverage, but not every individual might be seeking the same level of coverage. So being able to debundle some of the coverages is an example, with a comprehensive package, but maybe adding a rider for cancel for any reason. That way you're able to service the needs of individuals who feel standard packages are sufficient for their purpose, but that individual who wants to add more, rather than bundling those additional enhanced options into standard packages, kind of debundling so that you can allow all types of travelers, and depending on the risk tolerance, to be able to take them from a standard to a very enhanced package by allowing them to add riders to regular coverages. So it's not only what you're offering, but how you're offering it to be able to respond to everyone's needs. We saw it during the pandemic. Even when the restrictions were lifted, some people kept masking. So those are the types of individuals who might want to add additional riders to their coverage versus the ones who are, get this mask away from me, and those individuals would be ready to return to standard types of coverage now that the pandemic was over. So I think that's a helpful, and that's something that is going to be useful to our consumers.
Now, Katie, we have a couple of questions from the audience. One is fairly straightforward, so I'll just ask it of you, and it's sort of elaborating on your comment that COVID is now covered in standard policies. And the follow-up question is it covered at the same or different maximum limits?
Same. It's
Right.
basically with no advisories. It's basically covered as a medical condition, as a standard medical condition. Yes.
Okay, excellent. That's very helpful. And I have another question. I think this one's a little difficult to answer, but I'd be very interested in each of your perspectives. Let me start with you, Katia. Person says they don't routinely buy travel insurance. How do they know if they're paying too much?
Oh, that's interesting. How you know you're paying too much? I think the best way to approach it is to quote through different providers. once you've quoted 2, 3, 4 providers, and not only just looking at the price, really getting into the habit of understanding what you're getting for what you're paying for. I think one of the mistakes that consumers make is just looking at the premium aspect, but it's not only what do you pay, but it's what you get for the coverage you pay for. So just that type of comparison, and that's why there are those travel professionals that are trained. Just go and just make those inquiries, understand what you're covered for, what you're paying for it, and then maybe quote with 3 different insurance providers, and then you'll be able to settle on what you feel is the best coverage for you at what cost.
I think that's good advice, Katia. And before I turn to you, Helen, and then you, Sheila, I do want to also add that CAFII, CLHIA, and THIA all have websites with a lot of resources and a lot of information about travel insurance and the sort of things you need to be looking for, the things that you need to be careful about. That can also be helpful, I think, to consumers who are looking for some additional information. Helen, what would your advice be to this person?
Yeah, I would say speak to a trusted advisor. To Katia's point, there's comparisons of dollar, but there's also comparisons of what the value is for behind that product. And be careful to identify things that might be important to you. And that's where I think, talking to an advisor is helpful. There might be, different policy limits, and that's often something an average consumer might look at. But there's different exceptions and different policy language, terms and conditions that can be sensitive to, what your situation is. So good to go through the fine print. I know we've always encouraged people to read the fine print, but I think it's more important than ever now.
Thanks. Final word to you, Sheila, on this.
Yeah, just ditto what they both said. It's helpful to have an advisor walk you through the differences and understand exactly what you need. And that depends on a lot of things. Your situation, your health, where you're going could make a difference as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
and your risk
question.
tolerance.
Sorry, go ahead, Ellen.
I was just going to say, and your risk tolerance.
Yeah.
Right.
Some people might want to self-insure their baggage, and some people don't.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So, Sheila, I'm going to pose the next one to you because I know this is work you have done and CLHA has done with CAFII and with others. And so the question is, there are a couple actually, any current initiatives on harmonization of vocabulary to facilitate the understanding and comparison of products? And I know we have done work on that, so I'll be pleased to ask you to answer that. And then another similar question is, different words for the same coverage are problematic. Does the industry try to use the same words to make it easier for consumers? So Sheila, over to you on that.
Yeah, so you're right, Keith. It was about 2019, I think. I think the work started earlier than that members got together and came up with some common definitions and common exclusions and limitations and the way those things would be worded in a policy, as well as a standard way for a policy to be laid out. So you'd kind of be going through 2 policies and you could compare side by side because the information would be laid out in the same manner. And our committee just got together to review those because it's been 4 years. There's been a bit of change in the world in those 4 years. And they felt that, there's not a lot that needs to be changed in those standard ways of doing things, but we will revisit it every 3 to 4 years as things can change, new definitions can come into play, exclusions, limitations can change. So we'll continue to review that together.
And I guess the flip side I'd mention is that while we always want to try to have as a much similar language, it's a very competitive industry, which is a good thing for consumers. And that's part of why there are these innovations and different products and maybe different wordings, because the industry is always trying to respond to what they're hearing from consumers. And I think that's a healthy thing, a good thing for the marketplace. So I have a question that I have to ask now because my co-executive director colleague, Brendan Wicks, is retiring at the end of the year, and he wants to know the answer. So the question is, Canadians are getting older. At what age does travel insurance become prohibitively expensive? What can older Canadians do to mitigate this? And we have an audience question that I'm going to weave into this question, if I may, which is, what would be the best insurance option for snowbirds? So let me start with you, Katia.
Coming from an insurer's perspective, it's going to be hard for me to define that there is a point in time where it becomes prohibitively expensive, because when you look at the cost, especially as you get older, a heart attack, a visit to the ER in the US, the cost is sometimes in the millions. So with insurance, it's always a gamble, right? So you could spend more than you on premium that you end up spending on claims, but when you do have that one claim, sometimes it's worth it. So if you can afford it, purchase travel insurance. I think that's what I would say. What's the best coverage to get for a snowbird? It's all going to depend on your health status. There are plans out there that come with exclusions. And if you feel you've got stability in your medical condition, go with one of those, especially from a medical perspective. There are some specially underwritten plans where you can get covered even for pre-existing conditions. So depending on your health status and your risk tolerance, you have different options, but I always advise get the plan that has the best coverage for you, because when an insurance claim does come through, sometimes you regret not even paying like the $3,000 or $4,000.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. And Helen, it also gets to your point that there's no one answer because it depends on the individual's risk tolerance.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely it does. I think it's individuals' risk tolerance. And also as insurers, we have to look at our risk tolerance and what that looks like. I think that the industry has been based on a legacy or historical pricing models, and other insurance segments are looking at different models, or sorry, leverage different models. And perhaps there's more opportunity for us to as an industry look at those models and use multi-factor rating, and then that we're getting away from just basing a customer's rate based on age. That would certainly help this segment, as well as, you know, looking at travel as a snowbird, looking at travel outside of the US. Katia raised it, you know, claims in the US are exorbitantly expensive, and so if you're really looking for those affordable options, travel to other destinations might be something to explore.
Interesting. Sheila?
I would just add that I think that it's important to consider what else is included in a travel insurance policy. So it's not just the payment of the medical bills, but sometimes it's the negotiation of that cost. And that can be, you know, thousands of dollars, depending on your destination. And then there's things like repatriation. So they're going to get you back to Canada into a hospital here as quickly as it's safe to do. And that, you know, really saves you on those medical bills. There's a lot of policies that include, you know, travel for someone to stay with you while you're in the hospital at destination, or return them, returning your vehicle. Like, there's all kinds of things that are included. And so if you think about everything involved with being, you know, becoming sick or injured when you're traveling, it, you know, it adds to the value of having that travel insurance.
And I think it's just a good general education just to emphasize that in most travel insurance claims, the first thing the insurer tries to do is to, when it's safe, get the Canadian back home so that they can be treated here.
Yeah.
And so I think that's just an important thing to reemphasize. I've already gotten in the chat some comments about how insightful people have found the three of you. We're coming to the end of the webinar. It's just flown by. And I think that's because of how interesting it has been to listen to each of you. So thank you very much. We just have a few more questions. Sheila, I'm going to start with you. Audience question: what travel insurance issue keeps you up at night?
Oh, that's a big one. I guess, you know, just for our members, it's the thought of someone from the media maybe contacting me and asking about a particular situation and how that's depicted, you know, to the public, and how sometimes, you know, stories are shared and opinions are shared that are, you know, where the details of the situation aren't really well known, and what that does to the travel industry. So
I think that's a really excellent point. We've done research, as you know, Sheila, that shows that 98% of travel insurance claims are paid out in full or in part, but it's not the 98% that you hear about.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
the 2%. And even if there are legitimate reasons, it can be a very difficult issue to navigate when it's not positioned fairly. And often there are privacy issues that hamstring the company's ability to share everything.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that, Sheila. Helen, what keeps you up at night?
Yeah, I would say similar to Sheila's comment. I mean, at the end of the day, helping the customers is, at the heart of everything that we do and why we're here as an industry. And like Sheila said, just a bit of a tweak to that is, an individual being caught off guard. We're shocked by these moments, but we're not, because we know that not everyone reads their policy or understands the context of what they've purchased. And at the end of the day, if we can help people be better prepared and better understand their coverage, whether they're covered or, as you said, in those off cases when they're not, to not have that be a surprise, I think that would make us all sleep better at night, to have people understand their language and understand their coverage.
All right, thank you for that, Helen. And Katia, what keeps you up at night around travel insurance?
Yeah, I would not another pandemic, but another. So when COVID happened, I mean, a lot of us underwriters, we were mature in the industry. We thought we had seen it all. We thought we were prepared. And then COVID happened, and it was very humbling because the influx of clients that needed our help, and we're in the business of being there when you need the help, and it was really challenging. So really what keeps me up at night is, do I have everything in place that if anything else that were to happen requiring that much assistance or that type of support or the influx of service calls, would I be able to handle that, not knowing what I don't know, because I thought I knew, but I didn't know. So it's just always thinking in the back of my head, am I prepared enough? Am I prepared enough? Because the world has become quite unpredictable, and you never know what you're going to wake up to.
Excellent. Well, we only have 1 minute left, so I'm just going to ask for one final comment from each of you, just 20, 30 seconds each. Katia, I'm going to start with you. What do you see as a major trend in 24?
In 2024, I think it's the major trend for travel and travel insurance is technology. COVID has taught us that we need to really have a lot of self-serve options. I have to have companion technology where a client feels like we are with them every step of the way. And there are a lot of changes as well. If anyone has time later today, Google something called Icon of the Seas. It's just it's a new cruise ship that Royal Caribbean, I think they're going to start sailing in 2024. This cruise ship has townhomes. For $75,000, you can be on a cruise ship in a townhouse. So I think travel providers are starting to respond to these trips, to these trends that we're seeing, experience travel. But I think a lot of this is going to be technology, how we improve on an industry that's already mature, but how do we service it better, taking advantage of technology.
Excellent. Thank you, Katia. Helen?
Sure. I think picking up on the digital piece, I think we're going to see a new rebalancing. So yes, advancements in technology, using it differently to make things simpler and easier, but also the continued push and importance of that face-to-face or verbal conversations, that advice. So it's finding a new balance between those to make sure that we're giving the simplified digital solutions when that makes sense, but also being there for our customers when that's needed and when that human touch is needed.
Excellent. Sheila, final word to you.
Just from our industry, I think we'll see a few carriers add some new products to their repertoire, and maybe in response to some of the Visitor to Canada initiatives by the government, like the changes to the super visa policies and the requirement for employers to provide emergency medical coverage to temporary foreign workers.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Katia, Helen, Sheila. You've been absolutely wonderful panelists, insightful, full of wisdom, and very, very interesting observations. On behalf of everybody who attended and on behalf of CAFII, I just want to thank each of you. And for our attendees, thank you as well for joining us today. This is our last webinar in 2023, but we'll start our series again in 2024. I want to wish you all a great rest of your afternoon, and thank you again to all three of you. Have a great day. Bye.